Jeremy Renner didn't talk much. He wore a plain t-shirt, worn jeans, and a baseball cap with no logo. His posture was disciplined, clear and ready, like an old soldier. The young people thought he was a retired road worker, someone who spent his free time shooting, until a new Navy SEAL noticed the faded tattoo on his forearm while reloading his gun. The laughter stopped. That moment marked the beginning of memories filled with silence, discipline, and unfinished stories. Before we get into the story, let us know in the comments where you watched the video. And if you believe that stories like this should not be forgotten, subscribe and share to help keep them alive. Every Monday before the Arizona sun touched the red earth, Jeremy Renner would arrive at 6:45 a.m. The gravel in the parking lot crunched under his boots with heavy, steady steps. There was no rush, no show, just a precise rhythm, like a task performed countless times before. He always wore the same outfit, a dust-stained elbow-length shirt, worn-out dark jeans, and a brown unmarked hat. The hat's shadow hid his face, but his prominent cheekbones and hardened jawline bore traces of the past. The rest, his eyes, his silence, his alert posture, was left to interpretation. He signed the logbook as K. Charles. No last name, no ID, no smile. He paid in cash and left quietly. The young employees referred to him as the silent man in Lane 7. Jeremy never corrected them. There was no need. He moved through the corridor without a word. His boots tapped lightly on the concrete floor, but each step was deliberate. Lane 7 was next to the maintenance room, in the farthest corner where the dim lights flickered. Most shooters stayed away from there. It was too secluded, too eerie. But for Jeremy, it was the right place. Less attention, less noise. He silently and carefully placed his equipment on the table. A small worn holster, a half-empty box of 45 ACP bullets, and a rusty thermos with no name or logo, looking like it had been pulled from the front lines. No frills, no tactical patches, no ego trying to shine. This man wasn't putting on a show. He was ready, like someone who knew his job. He opened the holster and pulled out a steel gray 1911 with a matte finish and signs of wear on the slide. In an environment where everyone else had brought modern, flashy guns, this pistol was too quiet, too honest. Then he sat down, not to relax, to wait for the right moment. The shooting range opened at 7 a.m. Jeremy sat down quietly on a plastic chair. He rested his elbows on his knees and stared ahead. It was as if he was locked in a gaze with something from the past. Behind the back window, new employees sometimes whispered about him. A parking attendant? Maybe a former Boy Scout leader? Nah, just a retiree with some free time. They would dismiss him. No one knew the truth. At 7 a.m., Jeremy stood up. He loaded 5 bullets into the magazine, then walked to the lane. There was something about his stance, old but precise. As if given a command, he straightened his shoulders, controlled his breath, and aimed. 3 shots, a brief pause, then 2 more shots. All hit the center, all gathered in an area as small as a silver coin. There was no pride, no surprise. He emptied the gun and moved on to the next magazine. The same rhythm, soft, steady, unremarkable, but unforgettable. The 7th lane silently fell into his tempo. No one had noticed yet, but they would soon. The security door buzzed open, breaking the silence. 6 young men entered with noise and confidence. Navy commandos, freshly ironed camouflage uniforms, heavy footsteps, crude jokes. It felt more like a locker room than a duty area. Bags hit the floor, laughter echoed off the metal walls. They didn't even notice the man standing in the corner. It wasn't their time yet. "It's quiet here today," said one, his voice echoing, except for one man standing silently in the corner. Reggie pointed his chin toward the man in the flannel shirt, his head slightly bowed. He tossed his bag into the 5th lane. Then he shot a glance at Jeremy. Jeremy, without turning to them, calmly checked his weapon. The group looked at him, then laughed. "He's definitely the type who makes conspiracy videos on YouTube," Petty said mockingly. "No way," said another. "I think he's a failed carpentry teacher." Jeremy didn't move. He didn't even glance at them. He pushed the bolt forward, locked it, and went back to work. Reggie smiled as he put on his gloves. He was tall and muscular, with a sympathetic yet provocative air. The faded trident emblem on his left sleeve indicated he was on a special mission. "See that group of mine?" he boasted after 5 shots. "Look, tight. This is my thing. I'm ready already." "You're always ready, brother," Miles said, slapping him on the shoulder. Petty looked at the 7th lane and grinned. "What's an old man gonna do with a semi-auto?" Reggie chuckled. "Probably one bullet at a time." Praying. Laughter rose. It was harsh but unconscious. Not real malice, just youthful confidence. Still, Jeremy remained silent. He didn't even glance back. He kept firing. 3 shots, a pause. 2 more. A pause. The rhythm had an unsettling perfection to it. Unassuming but too smooth to ignore. Reggie fired again, this time fast and aggressive. But something changed in the air. It was as if the silence was saying something. Jeremy's shots weren't screaming, but their meaning was clear. It wasn't thunder, but a warning signal, soft but inevitable. Reggie looked again. The man hadn't moved, but all the shots had pierced the target's heart. No overadjustment, no gesture, no celebration. Just repeat, perfect repeat, not learned at a civilian shooting range, but somewhere else. The smirk faded from Petty's face. Miles dropped the joke. Even Reggie had taken a step back without being noticed. They weren't aware of it yet, but they were now on the same playing field as someone outside their own rules. And within a few minutes, they would learn what a lesson delivered in silence meant. The only thing distracting them was their own noise. The novices were arguing about calibers and recoil, too engrossed to notice anyone else's rhythm. Miles was praising the control of the 9mm pistol, while Reggie defended the stopping power of the 45s. Petty jumped in to stir things up as usual. A real shooter doesn't care about caliber. They take down the target. But while they were arguing, Jeremy had already started. 3 shots. Pause. 2 shots. Reload. No rush. No show. It was inevitable. The sound from the 7th lane didn't come through the other explosions. It settled among them with a clarity that was as distinct as a clock ticking, distracting without drawing attention. Even in the noise, it was clear. Reggie's focus wavered. He looked at his target. The hit wasn't bad, but there were deviations from the center. He furrowed his brow. He took off his earplugs and turned his head slightly. Behind that partition, Jeremy was still standing in the same position, motionless but alive, like a mountain that changes the weather without moving an inch. No posing, no attempt to impress, just pure form. No medals, no praise, just a reflex honed over time. Reggie whispered under his breath as if to himself, "That guy, is he from Special Forces or something?" Petty leaned forward. "I think he's filming survival videos on YouTube. He's got that retired truck driver vibe." Someone else laughed. "Or a John Wick copycat." This time the laughter was louder, but Jeremy didn't react. He just took out the magazine, checked the barrel. Every movement was as if it were one piece. Then he reloaded and continued. 3 shots. 2 more. Each one passed through the target's heart as if it had been pierced beforehand. Reggie shook his head, but couldn't take his eyes off him. "Man," he muttered, "he's not even breaking a sweat. He's not even flinching." "Can you see the target?" Petty asked. "It's hard to make out." "They're all in the same hole." The group fell silent. Jeremy didn't even look at them, but the silence had changed the atmosphere in the room. Even those unfamiliar with the weapon could sense an unnatural precision in that target. No one was holding their breath. No one was setting up the scene or striking a pose. There was only a man using the gun as an extension of his mind. Every movement Jeremy made was calculated, but unassuming. Petty leaned against the wall and bit his lip. "Is that a 1911? He asked in a low voice. Miles nodded. "Yes, old but precise. Heavy but smooth." Reggie remained silent. His jaw was tense. He felt something cracking inside. Now the man's clothes, age, or appearance didn't matter. There was a silent challenge in the air. Because the more they watched Jeremy, the clearer it became. The man never missed. And the more he didn't miss, the more everything they thought they knew was turned upside down. In the 7th lane, Jeremy pushed the slide forward with a familiar click. Another magazine, another breath. Then 3 shots, 2 more. Not fast, not showy, just flawless. Now they were really watching him. The tension wasn't loud anymore. It spread like water seeping through the ceiling. This was an unusual situation for Reggie. In his own territory in a range that resembled a base, he was usually the one talking, the one drawing attention. But now an old man in a flannel shirt had captured everyone's attention without saying a word. And it was unsettling him. He still didn't know Jeremy's name. But when he watched him fire 5 more shots from the 5th lane, something stirred inside him. The holes were stacked on top of each other. There was a pitch-black crater where the heart should have been. It wasn't the work of a gun, but of a precision machine. Reggie clenched his teeth. He had to break the spell. He took off his headphones and stood up, the sound of his boots echoing on the concrete floor. He tried to give himself courage with each step. The group was watching him, silently. When Reggie reached the red line of the 7th lane, Jeremy had just finished reloading. He was close, but not disrespectful. "Hey," Reggie said, his voice slightly relaxed. "Are you a master with that gun, or are you just good at pretending?" Jeremy didn't respond. He emptied the barrel, checked the magazine. Every movement was slow, methodical. Finally, he raised his head. There was no anger in his eyes, no amusement, just a straight, focused gaze, a silence that cut through Reggie's mask. Still, Reggie kept grinning. He tried to put back the confidence he was losing. "What do you say, old man? Up for a little race?" Those behind him chuckled. The fun was about to begin. Reggie raised his eyebrows. "Now you're getting into it, huh?" "5 shots," said Reggie. "You and me, closest grouping. Then 1 shot. The winner takes all." Jeremy lowered his head. He neither agreed nor refused. He didn't even blink. Then he slowly reached into his bag. Almost ceremoniously, he pulled out a plain target sheet. No adhesive, no grid, just a black silhouette. He carried the target himself to the 15-meter mark. He hung it up. He turned back. He hadn't said a word yet. But that silence spoke louder than anything. Reggie turned to his group. "Watch closely," he said. He loaded his Glock. He stepped into the 5th lane. He adjusted his stance. He controlled his breathing. This was the moment to reset the balance. 5 shots. 1 dash pause. 2. Pause. The last 2. The bullets entered the lower left side of the target cleanly. The grouping was clean, but off-center. Impressive, yes, but not perfect. The group shook their heads. Petty whistled. "Not bad." Reggie stepped back, chin up. "Your turn, Flannel." Jeremy didn't respond. No show. 0 gestures. He walked slowly, took his place, assumed his stance, didn't tense his muscles. You couldn't even tell he was holding his breath. Then he fired. 5 shots, neither fast nor slow, just accurate. Silence fell. There was only 1 hole in the target, not 5. 1. Reggie blinked. All from the same spot? No one spoke. Everyone watched the impossible unfold. Jeremy began reloading as if nothing had happened. The silence deepened. Reggie's friends didn't speak. Petty, who had been mocking, fell silent. He had raised his phone to record, but he was frozen. Reggie had put his Glock aside, showing no trace of his previous smirk. All eyes were on the target. There was only 1 hole in the silhouette's chest. No scattered bullet marks, no clusters, just 1 mark. It was still curling with its rough edges. This was not a hit achieved through training, but through something else. Through time, through silence, through the things that flowed from honor. Reggie swallowed. His first impulse was to make a joke and move on. Maybe say, "Lucky magazine." But he remained silent, because he knew it wasn't luck. Jeremy, with the same cool composure he'd had since walking in that morning, holstered his gun. There was no air of victory, no show. He didn't even glance at Reggie. He just took his rusty thermos, took a sip, as if there had been no competition at all. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It carried respect. Reggie looked at his target. His grouping was the best it had ever been, but it was off-center, and for the first time in a long time, he felt small. Reggie fixed his eyes on Jeremy. The man was reloading. Same clarity, same flow. No show, no hesitation, just rhythm. Petty whispered, his voice cracked. Buddy, you okay? Reggie didn't answer. He just watched Jeremy's hands. Every movement was like part of a ritual. Every magazine change was like a silent oath. No arrogance, no anger, just absolute balance. And that feeling, that familiar coldness came back. With the fifth shot, he felt that emotion wash over him again. This man had done this before, but not in places like this. Somewhere else. Somewhere with real targets. Somewhere where Oakley sunglasses weren't for protection, but for the eyes. Somewhere where bullets weren't just numbers, but carried meaning. Reggie swallowed hard. Then the light shifted. A beam hit Jeremy's weathered beige hat and fell on his face. His cheekbones, his jawline, his eyes. Reggie took a step forward. He squinted. This is Jeremy Renner. The words came out with difficulty. At first, no one believed it. Then everyone looked again. Not from movie posters, not from red carpets. This was a different face. Older, more real, sharpened by the weight of life. A man who had chosen silence, far from the spotlight. Finally, Jeremy raised his head. Their eyes met. There was no dramatic gesture, just a calm nod. Reggie whispered, It's you, isn't it?" Jeremy slowly placed his gun on the counter. Then he stood still and said one word, "I was." And in that moment, everyone in the room held their breath. Reggie jumped as if he had touched a live wire with his bare hands. The words kept echoing in his mind. "I was. I wasn't." You don't know. It wasn't just a name. It was the acceptance of a weight coming from beyond the walls. Petty turned, his eyes wide open. "Wait a minute. Jeremy Renner? That Jeremy Renner?" Reggie didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the man in the seventh lane, moving with the same calm discipline he'd maintained since the first light of dawn. The man they'd mocked, looked down on, but now couldn't take their eyes off. There was no pride, no ego. Reggie's mouth was dry. The Glock was still in his hand, but it felt different now. Cheaper, lighter, like a toy. Jeremy didn't speak. He just raised his old 1911. 5 more shots rang out. Bang, 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 bang. All into the same hole. All doubt vanished. This wasn't just skill. It was almost sacred. The physical manifestation of mastery. Something unaffected by the show, by the applause. Petty whispered again, his voice trembling this time. He's Hawkeye." Reggie shook his head silently. "He's the guy who plays Hawkeye." But now, watching him, everyone realized that the roles weren't so far from the man himself. The silence was deafening. No one was joking anymore. No one was brave enough to break the moment. The young novices, still standing near the center, hesitated, not knowing what to do with their weapons. Should they practice or just watch? Indecisively, they lowered their guns. Jeremy turned slightly. His flannel shirt hung loosely from his shoulders as he slowly holstered his gun. Then he picked up his old thermos. A deep, calm sip. No one spoke, but everyone was focused on his silence. Reggie's courage had been stripped away layer by layer. He felt like a young child challenging a master fighter to a fight. But this was not a moment of shame. Something else had taken its place in his chest. Respect. And beneath that, quieter but heavier, was regret. For smiling. For passing judgment. For realizing how cheap it was to judge a man by his appearance alone. Jeremy sat back down on the bench. He rested his elbows on his knees. His eyes stared ahead as if reading a story that no one else could see. The ceiling light illuminated the edge of his chin. The half that remained in shadow seemed less dramatic than trying to avoid unnecessary light. The others withdrew one by one. They returned to their lanes. There was no defiance, no laughter. Only a silent acceptance, like a military ceremony. Respect was no longer commanded, but set by example. In the seventh lane, it was no longer an ordinary corner strip. It was as if being there was a privilege. Reggie stayed there for a few more seconds. He felt the truth settling on him like the morning light. He had come to prove himself, but standing before him was a man who had already proven himself. The next Monday morning, the gravel crunched earlier than usual. The sun had barely touched the horizon, but the parking lot was already half full. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The Bluetooth speakers were muted. There was no idle chatter. The regulars, who usually took up the center, were now instinctively moving to the back. Because Lane 7 was expected. It was 6:44 a.m. The door opened. Jeremy Renner walked in, just like the week before. Same flannel shirt, same worn jeans, same simple hat. No one said his name, but everyone turned their heads. Not out of curiosity, out of recognition. The receptionist looked up this time. He gave a slight nod. Jeremy responded with a brief glance. Neither too much nor too little. As always, he walked straight to the registration book. The page was opened. The writing was familiar. K. Charles. But this time something was different. Lane 7 had changed. The counter had been wiped clean, the boards polished, and right where the shooters rested their elbows, a small brass plate had been carefully screwed into place. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just a sign, silent but definitive. This lane is yours until further notice. Jeremy said nothing. There was no need. He placed his equipment in the same order: holster, ammunition, thermos, cloth. Then he began. 3 shots, pause, 2 shots, reset, the same rhythm. But the space behind him was no longer empty. A few meters away stood Reggie. There was no smirk on his face, no competitive spirit. He wasn't wearing gloves. Petty and 2 others were beside him. This time they weren't there as rivals, but as spectators. Like students watching a master outside a dojo, they were distant but attentive. Reggie had something in his hand, a new box of 45 ACP rounds. When Jeremy finished his second magazine, Reggie carefully stepped forward from behind the line. He extended it not ceremoniously, not with unnecessary seriousness, but with sincere intent. I understand, he said in a low but clear voice. 30 rounds weren't enough today. Jeremy stopped. He left his hand halfway. He looked at the box. Then he turned his eyes to Reggie. Time seemed to stop for a few seconds. Then Jeremy shook his head, slower than the others, more clearly, a real acceptance. He was still silent, but everything had been said. Reggie stepped back. No extra words were needed. The others were watching. They stood straighter now. Their eyes no longer held empty curiosity, but genuine attention. They weren't there to film, but to truly learn. Jeremy started shooting again. Same rhythm, same limited dose, but now each bullet was not just a target, but a message. Without orders, without titles, it was effective even without effort. The shooting range had changed. Those posing had fallen silent. Those chasing targets had quieted down. Even the instructors had stopped correcting their students and were watching the 7th lane. Because there was a man who didn't need a stage or praise. But he was still teaching everyone something unforgettable. True mastery doesn't make itself known. It doesn't chase fame. It just comes and does. The shots stopped. The smell of gunpowder in the air was heavy, like the last trace of a storm. Jeremy Renner was sitting at the end of the lane. His elbows were resting on his knees. He was holding a thermos in his hands, but his eyes were not on the target. They were looking beyond it, as if they were looking at a point only he knew. The children approached one by one. It was no longer a crowd. They seemed to have come not to watch a show, but to understand a stance. Silently, they stepped into the lane, which looked like a temple, as if they were on a pilgrimage. Petty was the first to arrive. He had his hands behind his back, his eyes on the ground. Hesitantly, almost in a whisper, he spoke. "Sir, we've been looking into you." Jeremy didn't move. His silence seemed like approval. "You've saved many lives." There was a long pause. Then Jeremy replied in a voice so soft it was almost inaudible. "They saved each other." Petty nodded. His eyes were misty. He stepped back without saying a word. Then Miles came. Then Grant. Finally, Reggie. At first, he didn't speak. He just came close. He stood silently beside him, on the same bench just like a week ago. They both looked ahead, without speaking, just standing together. Then Reggie broke the silence. "Have you ever really thought about teaching?" Jeremy breathed lightly through his nose. His answer seemed caught between the past and the present. "I spent years," he said, "trying to forget everything I could teach." Reggie nodded. He understood. No words were needed. Jeremy continued. His voice was quieter this time. Some things you don't teach, they just sink in over time. Reggie smiled slightly. That's why I'm still here. Jeremy glanced at him. Then a dry but genuine twitch formed on his lips. Then, let's not talk anymore. They both laughed. There was no exaggeration, no forcing, just a simple, short, honest laugh. A few minutes later, Jeremy stood up. He didn't touch the full ammunition box Reggie had handed him. He left it on the counter as it was. It was a thank you, a boundary, a lesson. Wordless. The next morning, a second plaque had been affixed to the 7th lane. Small, brushed brass, postcard-sized. He left before he could say it. No name, no rank, no famous title, just emptiness and respect. And that morning, everyone understood something. This wasn't about shooting, it was about stance. How a person stands when no one is watching. That was the truth. True mastery is not about sound, but about presence. And true respect is not earned by seeking it, it is earned in silence. In a world chasing applause, attention, and virality, Jeremy Renner had simply walked in. Without saying a word, he had silenced everyone. And he had reminded us all that the person shouting the loudest in the room is rarely the most dangerous one. He didn't boast. He didn't try to correct their arrogance. He simply let them crumble under the weight of their own arrogance. And when they crumbled, Jeremy kept going. If this story moved you, share it. Not just for clicks, because someone out there might really need it. If you believe that true strength lies in silence, leave just one word in the comments, respect. And let us know where you watched it. Because this isn't just a story, it's a reminder.